woke Waitress Humiliates Clint Eastwood by throwing coffee on his head, not knowing he was the owner of the restaurant. The sound of shattering glass pierced the silence like a gunshot. The garçonette stood frozen, her right hand still extended, fingers trembling in the space where the photograph had been moments before. Now it lay in pieces on the hardwood floor of Aurora restaurant, a constellation of broken memories. "What have you done?" Another server's voice called from across the dining room, small and uncertain. She couldn't answer. Her eyes were locked. With Clint Eastwood's across the room, his face a mask of shock that mirrored her own. Years of working at the elegant Aurora restaurant, and she'd never thrown anything in anger. Not once. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered, her voice catching on the words. Clint took a step toward her, glass crunching beneath his expensive shoes. His face softened, and for a moment she thought he might reach for her. Instead, he stopped, shoulders slumping as he looked down at the broken frame. "I need some time," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of his years in Hollywood. The photograph between them was from the restaurant opening day. Clint, in his elegant suit, the garçonette in her new uniform, both smiling professionally. Between the fractured glass, their professional selves stared up, oblivious to what the future held. "Mr. Eastwood, please." But the words died in her throat as he turned away. She heard him walking toward his private office, murmuring reassurances. To the restaurant manager, the sound of a door closing firmly, all the ordinary sounds of someone retreating from conflict. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the windows like hesitant fingertips. The garçonette sank to her knees beside the broken frame, not caring as glass bit into her skin. Among the shards, she spotted the folded yellow paper that had been hidden behind their restaurant photo for nearly a year, the secret that had finally broken them apart. 16 months earlier, the garçonette had been working late at Aurora, the elegant and renowned restaurant where each detail, from the soft lighting to the refined decoration, exuded sophistication. In the discreet buzzing of clients and soft instrumental music, she prepared for another work shift. Determined and attentive to any sign of behavior she considered disrespectful or outdated, she was always ready to question attitudes that perpetuated prejudice, even if it meant acting impulsively. That night, a customer with an imposing presence entered the restaurant with a classic air reminiscent of old cinema icons. His impeccable appearance and subtle gestures demonstrated a posture of superiority and contempt for the social transformations of recent times. For the garçonette, this was a clear sign of an outdated and exclusionary vision, incompatible with the respectful environment she valued so highly. As she continued her duties, the garçonette carefully observed every detail in the dining room. At a certain moment, while serving the arrogant customer who maintained attitudes she considered offensive, something inside her ignited. Accumulating countless stories of injustice and discrimination, she felt this was the tipping point to take action. Taken by an impulse for justice and convinced she needed to uphold the values she defended, she approached the man. Without hesitation and ignoring the conduct protocols that kept her from direct confrontations, she grabbed a container of freshly brewed coffee, whose intense and warm aroma contrasted with the restaurant's sophisticated atmosphere, and, in a gesture loaded with revolt and symbolism, threw the liquid directly at the customer's head. The coffee spread quickly, staining his tie and wetting his impeccable suit, in an act that for her represented an immediate response to attitudes she deemed intolerable. The room plunged into stunned silence. Customers and staff paused for a few moments as the sound of dripping coffee echoed through the environment. The man, visibly surprised and shocked, held his head trying to understand what had just happened. For the garçonette, this was an act of protest, a symbolic cry against the status quo and a gesture of resistance against discriminatory practices that, however subtle, wounded the dignity of people who deserved respect. However, the outcome of that impulsive action held an unexpected twist. As the garçonette prepared to face the possible consequences of her act, fearing being reprimanded or forced to justify her attitude, a murmur ran through the room. Among the customers, someone revealed something no one could have imagined. The man who had just been hit by the coffee was not just any customer. He was, in fact, Clint Eastwood, who that night had chosen to blend in with others disguised as a common patron, but who, as it was discovered, was the true owner of the restaurant. The revelation spread quickly, transforming the atmosphere. For a brief moment, the garçonnette was stupefied, confronted with the surprise of having assaulted someone whose position and importance she never imagined. The impact of this discovery was felt by everyone. While some customers expressed shock and disbelief, others maintained a heavy silence, pondering the boundaries between justice and excess. The restaurant manager, quickly mobilized by the tumult, approached to understand the situation and seek a solution that would preserve the establishment's reputation. Clint Eastwood, even in the face of embarrassment and the unusual episode, maintained a surprisingly serene posture. Instead of reacting with fury, he analyzed the scene with a gaze that oscillated between indignation and a kind of understanding of the complex nuances of power relations. For him, that episode revealed not only an act of protest, but also the fragility of hasty judgments and stereotypes that can exist even in apparently sophisticated environments. While the manager tried to calm the mood and ensure the incident wouldn't tarnish the restaurant's image, the garçonnette faced a whirlwind of feelings. The conviction of having acted in the name of social justice mixed with the embarrassment of having disrespected someone whose identity was so relevant. Gradually, awareness of the gravity of the act imposed itself, causing her to reflect on the limits of impulsive activism and the importance of analyzing each situation carefully before acting. The sound of the office door opening jerked the garçonnette back to the present. Through the restaurant windows, she watched the other staff helping customers, trying to maintain normalcy after the incident. None of them looked in her direction. As the last customers left, she carefully picked up the largest fragment of glass. Her reflection stared back, distorted and unfamiliar. 3 hours later, she sat surrounded by staff records in the employee break room. Months of shared history spread around her like archaeological evidence: the restaurant opening, Clint holding awards for his establishment, the staff in front of Aurora, renovation paintbrushes in hand, all wearing matching aprons splattered with Aurora blue. Moments of professional pride captured in fading photographs. But had she been working under a false impression these past few months, or had she been the one perpetuating deception by assuming too much? The antique clock in the dining room, a personal gift from Clint to the restaurant, chimed midnight when the garçonnette heard a car door close outside. She moved to the window, expecting to see the manager returning for something forgotten. Instead, a woman stood in the parking lot, her figure blurred by rain. The customer she had defended earlier that day. The garçonnette's first instinct was to lock the doors, to retreat. Instead, she found herself walking to the entrance, opening the front door. "We're closed," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The woman nodded, rain dripping from her hair. "I know. I came to talk to you." 20 minutes later, they sat at opposite ends of a dining table, steam rising from mugs of tea neither had touched. The woman spoke first, her words careful but direct. "He's not what you think he is," she said. "Clint Eastwood has been a champion for diversity and inclusion in his productions for years." "That doesn't excuse his behavior tonight," the garçonnette said. "No, it doesn't." The woman looked down at her hands. "But I've known him professionally for 6 years, 2 film projects. Clint and I haven't spoken outside of professional settings until tonight." "Then why are you here?" "Because Clint called me after the incident. He said you misunderstood his conversation with me, that everything was falling apart at his new restaurant." She paused. He sounded confused, like he couldn't understand how his words were so misinterpreted. The restaurant fell silent except for the rhythmic dripping of the kitchen faucet, a repair the maintenance staff had started but never finished. The garçonnette stared at the worn spot on the table where customers ate dinner every night, where staff counted tips, where Clint spread out his restaurant plans when he worked on site. "We may have misjudged him," the woman continued when the garçonnette didn't respond. "I'm not asking you to abandon your principles, but I thought you should know that he supported many of the same causes you fight for, just more quietly. The man deserves to be known for what he actually believes, not what you assumed." The question is whether that matters anymore. After the woman left, the garçonette sat alone in the dining room until dawn, the untouched tea growing cold. When morning light filtered through the windows, she found herself in Clint's office, surrounded by the evidence of his passion. Photographs pinned to corkboards, awards on shelves, books stacked, in organized chaos. On his desk sat a leather-bound notebook she'd never seen before. Inside, she found not restaurant plans, but community initiatives, dozens of projects for supporting local businesses, promoting diversity, and creating opportunities for marginalized groups. Events at Aurora that would showcase culinary traditions from around the world. Programs dated and annotated in his precise handwriting. On the final pages were preliminary plans for a community kitchen addition to the restaurant, a space with teaching stations and shared cooking facilities. In the margin he'd written, "For youth program, a place for teaching career skills with emphasis on those from underserved communities." He'd been planning a social initiative all along. The garçonette closed the notebook, a hollow feeling expanding in her chest. The misunderstanding was real. Her pain was justified, but her assumptions about him had been completely wrong. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone. Clint Eastwood returned to the restaurant 3 days later, standing awkwardly in the entryway of Aurora like a visitor. The garçonette had cleaned up the broken glass, but left the empty frame on the host stand, a deliberate reminder of what had shattered. "The staff wants to move forward," he said. "They miss the old atmosphere." "I miss it too." The garçonette leaned against the doorway to the dining room, arms crossed. "But we need to figure this out first." Clint nodded, his eyes taking in the room as if seeing it for the first time, or the last. "I should have been clearer about my intentions for this place," he said finally. "I wasn't trying to be secretive. And I should have asked questions instead of making assumptions," she replied. "Instead, I reacted impulsively and let it poison everything between us and the restaurant." Clint looked at her, surprise evident on his weathered face. "You're admitting a mistake. I heard about your community initiatives. I found your notebook." He closed his eyes briefly, understanding flashing across his features. "So now you know." "I've been judging you based on stereotypes and appearances," she said quietly. A bitter laugh escaped him. "What a mess we've made of this place." The garçonette uncrossed her arms, taking a step toward him. "I found your community kitchen plans." Clint's cheeks flushed slightly. It was supposed to be a surprise announcement. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "but I don't need grand gestures, Mr. Eastwood. I need to understand. I need to know if we can rebuild this professional relationship." Outside, rain had given way to tentative sunshine. Light streamed through the stained glass panels above the restaurant doors, a feature they'd preserved during renovations, casting prisms of color across the entryway floor. Clint extended his hand, palm up, into a pool of blue light between them. "The thing about old restaurants," he said, his voice uneven, "is that they're never really finished. There's always another improvement, another evolution. You just have to decide if the establishment is worth saving." The garçonette looked at his outstretched hand, then at the empty frame on the host stand. After a long moment, she stepped forward and placed her hand in his. "I think," she said carefully, "that we should start by putting in new glass." 6. Months later, on the anniversary of Aurora's opening, they gathered in the half-finished community kitchen. Clint, the garçonette, the staff, and a small group of community members. The September evening was cool enough for the fireplace Clint had insisted on installing, yet warm enough for the French doors to remain open to the garden. Local youth, firmly in their culinary training phase, had nonetheless helped the staff hang decorative lights along the exposed ceiling beams. They now sat attentively at the cooking stations, deep in conversation with professional chefs about their culinary projects. "Well?" Clint appeared at the garçonette's side, handing her a glass of sparkling water. "Does it match the plans?" "The key?" Garçonette surveyed the room. The built-in storage still waiting for paint. The reclaimed wood countertops, the large windows that would flood the space with light on sunny days. In one corner stood her teaching station, relocated from the main kitchen, with a new demonstration mirror above it. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it, even unfinished. Clint's smile contained equal parts relief and joy. "The contractor says we can have it completely done by Thanksgiving." The garçonette leaned against the counter slightly, their professional boundaries respectfully maintained. "No rush. I'm enjoying watching it come together." Their progress as colleagues had been slower, more deliberate than the construction. Weekly staff meetings, difficult conversations about assumptions and prejudice, learning to communicate without accusation or defense. Some days were easier than others. The trust was rebuilding gradually, like the layers of fresh paint on their walls. After their guests departed, the garçonette found herself alone in the new space, while Clint and the staff cleaned up in the main kitchen. On the demonstration counter lay a small wrapped package she hadn't noticed earlier. The card read simply, "For new beginnings, CE." Inside was a silver frame, elegant but simpler than the ornate one she'd broken. It held a recent photograph, the entire staff at a community event 2 months ago, arms around each other's shoulders, genuinely smiling. The garçonette traced the edge of the frame with her fingertip. The past couldn't be erased or rewritten. The misunderstanding and the months of tension had left their mark. But as she listened to the sounds of her colleagues in the next room, youthful laughter, Clint's distinctive voice giving instructions, she recognized the truth in what they were building. A renovation rather than a demolition. Something weathered but sturdy, being thoughtfully restored. Through the new windows she could see their reflection against the darkening garden. A woman holding a framed photograph in a room still taking shape. Imperfect, unfinished, but standing.